And good morning, and welcome to Senior Talk. This morning we have a very special guest. First of all, let me say that Senior Talk is brought to you every Monday morning by Harbor Place, senior living community down in Port St. Lucie. Today we are joined by Diann McDonough. She's the Director of Sales at the Harbor Place, that should be, Diann. And this morning we have a special guest, and Diann, I'll turn it over to you so you can introduce our special guest this morning.
Fantastic. Good morning, Paul, and to all our listeners. I would like to take a moment to thank all our veterans for their service. I hope today's show is informative and inspiring to all, especially to those aviators who flew the fighters, such as the 1930 P-26 pea shooter fighter prior to the jet engines. Today, our special guest is Lieutenant Commander Daniel Kitts, Naval Aviator, Test Pilot. Good morning, Lieutenant Commander.
Good morning, Diann. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Good morning, Commander.
Please tell us more about you and your career in the U.S. Navy.
So I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2001, and I was selected to become a naval aviator. I then moved down to Pensacola, Florida, and began my flight training up at NAS Whiting Field in Milton, Florida, flying a T-34 single-engine propeller aircraft for my primary flight training. After that, I moved down to Kingsville, Texas, and did my advanced jet training in a T-45 Goshawk single-engine jet airplane. Upon the completion of that, I was then transferred to NAS Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I learned how to fly the F-18C Hornet, and then subsequently did my first fleet operational tour at VFA 37, a squadron called the Raging Bulls there in Virginia Beach. At the end of that tour, that was a 3-year tour with including an operational cruise on the Harry S. Truman in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was selected to go to the United States Naval Test Pilot School in Patuxent River, Maryland, at the Naval Air Station, Patuxent River. That was a year-long school, about 11 months of school there to learn how to become a test pilot. And when I completed that, I did a 2-year follow-on test pilot tour doing carrier suitability work for the F-18 Hornet and F-18 ENF Super Hornet. When I completed that, I went and did a tour on carrier air wing staff out in Atsugi, Japan with carrier air wing 5, and then did my operational department head tour in Lemoore, California with VFA 86, a squadron called the Sidewinders, that I completed in the winter of 2015. After that, I came back to Pax River to do another tour as a test pilot, this time flying the F-35B and C variant here at Pax River and doing carrier suitability work for those airplanes.
Well, fantastic. You're a test pilot for what current plane?
For the F-35, both the B variant and the C variant, and it's called the Lightning II aircraft.
Fantastic. For the F-35 in production, let's take this from the beginning. Competing for the contract to build the next generation fighters, it was Lockheed Martin, Boeing, McDonnell, and Douglas. Tell us the story.
So the United States government had a requirement to build a single joint strike fighter. So for all of our services to purchase, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the United States Navy, as well as many foreign partners. And they asked all the defense contractors that built fighters at the time to submit their design proposals. Out of that, 2 contractors were selected to actually build a flying prototype of the aircraft. The down select at that time was down to Boeing and Lockheed Martin to build their flying prototypes. That had ramifications across the industry ultimately, with Boeing ended up buying McDonnell Douglas basically because of the result of that decision by the government to select those 2 contractors to build the flying prototype. So Boeing built a prototype called the X-32, and Lockheed Martin built a prototype called the X-35, and they had to demonstrate certain things with those aircraft in a basically fly-off competition between the 2 companies. That took place really around the turn of the century. 2000, 2001 was the fly-off competition, and 2001, the decision from the government was that Lockheed Martin was the winner of that competition, and was then given the subsequent contract to start development and building the F-35 that we have today. So it's a descendant from the X-35 and that fly-off competition between Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
What a task to have to complete, a fighter to do all three: land on carrier, am I correct, evade the enemy radar, and hover like a helicopter.
Yeah, so it's a pretty significant engineering challenge. There's three variants of the F-35, A, B, and C variant. The A variant we call the conventional takeoff and land variant. That is the variant that will be most predominantly produced, that it will be bought by the Air Force and many of our foreign partners that are buying this aircraft. The B variant is we call the STOVL, short takeoff vertical land aircraft, to launch from our amphib carrier decks. That's the B variant, and that's also going to be bought by some of our foreign partners, as well as the United States Marine Corps. And then the C variant is our carrier, conventional carrier variant that will be launched off U.S. aircraft carriers, and that's being bought by the United States Navy and the Marine Corps. So a common airframe, a lot of common parts and commonality between the mission systems, between all three of the variants, and asked to do extremely different things between carrier takeoff, short takeoff, vertical land, and conventional runway takeoff. So it's a pretty remarkable design challenge for any firm to go through to design one airplane that meets those three requirements.
Fantastic. All right, so we're going to describe some of the features so our listeners can really appreciate the F-35 program. When a plane is using a radar, it makes itself visible to all other planes. How does the F-35 evade enemy radar?
So one of the design features of the aircraft is its low observable features. So that is one of the design principles that go into what we call the fifth generation fighter. So a generational leap over what we've historically flown in the last generation, which is the F-18, F-16, and F-15. And a lot of features are built into the airplane to make it low observable to threat radars.
Fantastic. For jet planes, it's my understanding that they normally are built with two engines. In the F-35 program, they converted to a one engine. And your thoughts on the reliability of that?
So the engine manufacturer is Pratt & Whitney, and it's the F-135 engine that's in our airplane. When you design an airplane that has to do those three mission sets that we spoke to earlier, one of them being vertical land capability, you really have to take into account the weight of the airplane. You just can't get the airplane too heavy to be able to perform that task. And so one of the ways that you can really save a lot of weight, a design trade-off, is to go with a single engine. Now, the single engine that we've built, again, is a generational leap in engine technology. And from my experience with flying the airplane so far, there's absolutely zero concerns about the reliability of this engine. We have not to date really witnessed any anomalies whatsoever with the engine while we've been operating it in some extreme flight envelopes and conditions. So I don't think that it's as big of a concern as we've been left with older engine and older engine technology that have had more anomalies experienced with them. What we've seen so far with this engine is that it's been performing very well and very reliably.
Describe your helmet to me.
So the helmet, or what we call the HMD, the helmet-mounted device, is a really, really cool piece of gear that the airplane has. So traditionally, my flying experience prior to this in the F-18, there is what we call a heads-up display. And so displayed on a small glass pane on the dash of the cockpit right in front of the pilot's eye is that heads-up display. And it displays all the critical information that you need to fly the airplane. So the airplane altitude, attitude, airspeed, Mach number, all that information is displayed on that pane of glass. With this airplane, they decided to go away from that heads-up display and not have a physical pane of glass sitting in front of the pilot's eye, but rather display all that information through two projections onto the visor of the helmet. So we call that the helmet-mounted device. And that displays all the information that you need to fly the airplane that we typically have had on a HUD, and more information. So airspeed, altitude, attitude, targeting information, and then you can also display on there video will actually display on that visor from the systems of the airplane. So the mission systems around the airplane are collecting information, and that can also be displayed through video onto the visor of the helmet-mounted device. So it can really give you a lot of information about the aircraft. It'll give you a lot of situational awareness to what's going on around your aircraft, and it is really, really phenomenal piece of technology in the airplane.
Commands and controls, voice recognition, touch screens, cursor hooking.
Yeah, so the main way that we interface with the airplane is via what we call the panoramic cockpit display. And it's essentially a wide flat screen TV that's mounted where you've typically seen on other airplanes, maybe smaller screens or some of the gauges and dials and knobs. We really don't have that in this airplane. It's a 20-inch by 8-inch tall touchscreen glass, single pane glass display. That's really how we manipulate everything on the aircraft. And we can bring up across that display can be divided into 4 portals and can display a whole lot of different information that's being collected by the different mission systems on the airplane, as well as some of the vehicle systems where we can monitor the airplane health. So the engine instruments and other things like that can be displayed on that single glass screen. It's touch screen, so we interface with it by touch, or our stick and our throttle have a series of buttons that can manipulate those controls. So one of them is that cursor like you spoke to. It's essentially like using the cursor on your computer. On the throttle of the airplane is a control that manipulates that cursor around the screen so you can select different functionality across that large panoramic cockpit display and change what you're looking at or make changes to inputs on the airplane. The airplane also does have voice recognition. So normally when you cue the radio, most other folks out there that might be aviators are used to having 1 or 2 position switch that will key the radio. We actually have a 4-position switch because we can talk on 3 different radios. And then the 4th position will activate our voice recognition system. So it really reduces pilot workload to be able to activate the voice recognition system, give it a commanded new navigational waypoint to navigate to, or a new frequency for the radio without actually having to bring your hands off the stick and throttle to manipulate buttons or knobs. We can all do that just through voice recognition and really reduce the time that you spend without your hands on the stick and the throttle.
Hi, Commander Kitts. My name is Paul. I'm here on the station with Diann right now. I want to thank you for joining our show this morning. Excuse me. I have a couple questions. I'm sure many of our listeners right now are old veterans, and probably with some of the things you've been describing, they may be they're probably flying prop jobs back in WW2 or Korea. My question for you: how many troops or people are involved with getting that jet ready to go so you can fly it safely?
Well, what we do is very unique in the test world. So we're doing developmental tests on the airplane, and we have a very large team of engineers and maintainers that work on this airplane really around the clock to get it ready to go. And our airplanes are specially built airplanes with special pieces of instrumentation on them to measure different loads and stresses on the airplane. And it has instrumentation that gets recorded all throughout flight, that records all of our flight parameters. So what we do probably isn't mission representative for what folks will actually do when they're out operating this airplane, but we literally have hundreds of people working on this airplane every day. So the maintenance team that works on it and prepares it is probably around the size of 100 folks that will be working on getting the airplane. Before we fly the airplane in our test world, it'll go through 4 individual inspections that need to be signed off. So 4 different inspections before we even walk to the airplane to fly it. And then a whole team, every time we go flying, mans a control room that monitors all the aircraft parameters as we're flying to make sure that we're executing our test safely and within the parameters that it's designed to be executed in. So that'll be another couple dozen people that are just there specifically to support the flight. Not to mention when we get back and we have just troves of data that the aircraft collects, all that data gets fed back into the different engineering disciplines, both here and back in Fort Worth and in our program office, which is in Crystal City, Virginia. And those folks pour through that data information. So, I mean, I wouldn't even be able to put an exact number on the amount of people that are working on this jet and working on the developmental test. But probably by the end of the day, as we finish a flight, it probably gets into the thousands of people that actually have an impact on that flight and analyzing the results from it.
It's my understanding that it's international. There's other countries that are making parts for this, our allies.
Yeah, so parts are being made, and you know, Lockheed Martin is the prime contractor, but there are other American contractors and British contractors that are working on it. So Northrop Grumman has a part in it. BAE, British Aerospace Engineering, has a part in it. Obviously, Pratt & Whitney's building the engine. So parts are being built all over our country and also being built all over the world. There will be production facilities. I think we actually have F-35s coming off a production facility in Italy, and there will be one in Japan as well. The Brits are buying it. The Dutch are buying it. Israelis are also buying the aircraft. So the aircraft is really going to be really spread around the world, and a whole lot of different operators are going to be utilizing it around the world, much like the F-16 and the F-18 have been before. We do have a lot of foreign partners that have been operating those two aircraft for a number of years. So it's not a construct that's new to us, and it is certainly one that we are continuing with this airframe.
Weapons support. Tell me what types of weapons and ammunition that's on this plane.
Yeah, so we could carry a lot of things that our legacy airplanes have carried. AIM-9X is our short-range air-to-air missile, and AIM-120 AMRAAM is our advanced medium-range air-to-air missile that can also be carried. We can carry laser-guided bombs, GPS-guided munitions. One of the things that this aircraft has brought to the Navy that we haven't seen before is it has an internal weapons bay. So we can carry weapons internal to the airplane, which we haven't really been able to do before. And that ensures that we can carry a good loadout of weapons inside the airplane, which maintains the reduced radar cross-section of the airplane rather than carrying them externally. There is also option to carry those weapons externally, but certainly the ability to carry weapons internal to the airplane is something that we haven't had in a while.
Another question I have for you is the F-35, is that a single pilot airplane, or is there a navigator on board as well?
It is a single seat airplane. Yeah, so all variants, both the A, B, and C, are all single seat. Historically, we've built a special version for training new pilots that will have 2 seats, but this airplane does not have that. There is no 2-seat variant. They are all single seat fighters.
All right, another feature, missile detection and tracking.
So there are a whole host of mission systems on the airplane that really kind of fuse information and data together for the pilot. So it's constantly collecting information from around the airplane and the mission systems that are mounted all around the airplane. And the nice thing is that it fuses all of that data and all of that information into one display for the pilot. So right there in front of the pilot all the time, he can have a really good picture of what's going on all around his airplane, and really provide what we call situational awareness. So the ability to really understand what's happening in the environment that you're flying in really provides something to a level which we haven't really seen before. So it's really cool to see. The other nice thing, and the other thing that'll be really key for the airplane, is that it shares that data, and it'll share that data with our older F-18s and with our ships in our strike group. So not only will it be a lethal airplane in and of itself, but it'll help to make our other airplanes that we have more situational awareness, be more lethal. It'll help our ships have more situational awareness. So it's really a new concept of getting that information and then sharing that information across assets in the strike group that really make it something that's remarkable.
Is that airplane qualified for carrier landing?
Yeah, so we actually just recently got off the ship. We were on the USS George Washington off the Virginia coast, and that was our third at-sea test period that we've done. So We completed one in the late fall of 2015, and then one in the fall of 2014. So it was a series of 3 trips to the boat. The first one was on the Nimitz off San Diego. The second one was on the Dwight D. Eisenhower off Virginia, and the last was on the George Washington. And we sort of increased the scope of what the airplane was expected to do across those 3 developmental test periods. So we launched with steadily higher weights for the airplane, with more ordnance on the airplane as we progressed through those 3 ship trials. We increased the crosswinds that we launch and recover with. And so all of that was part of the developmental tests that we need to do to make sure that the airplane is ready to use for the fleet users in the Navy here coming up. The Navy's going to declare its initial operational capability. The intent is to do that in 2018. So this most recent trip, we spent about 2.5 weeks on board the George Washington, really finishing up all the carrier work that we need to do to make sure that the airplane is ready to go for fleet use.
Lieutenant Commander, we have a couple of minutes before we go on our break, and then I hope our listeners come back because we're going to have a really great half hour left to talk about the F-35 program and your naval career. But I just want to let you know that Lieutenant Commander Kitts and I are related. Can you tell them how we're related?
Yeah, so the other good thing that Navy has done to me is when I was stationed down in Kingsville, I met my wife, Michelle Banks, at the time when I was in Kingsville. There was a little bit of a delay before we started flight training, and I was fortunate to meet her there, and we began dating, and that kind of made my delay disappear. So that is Diann's youngest sister. So that's how I met Diann and became family members. So she is my sister-in-law.
So if I call you Danny, forgive me, listeners. It's just a habit. I'm trying to train myself to say Lieutenant Commander. Paul?
Yeah, Commander, I was, Diann had mentioned you were coming on this morning. I heard you mention that Sugi. I was at Mag 11 during 1963. That's when they had the F-8 Phantom. You probably recall that airplane. Yeah, that was a long time ago, but Atsugi still stands out in my mind. Yeah,
Atsugi was a really wonderful tour for us. While we were there, they had the Great Eastern Earthquake and the accident at the nuclear power plant, and it was really amazing to watch that country come together and how they handle with a catastrophe, and to be really part of, Carrier Air Wing 5 and the Navy immediately took a response to help out the people of Japan there in an operation that we called Tomodachi, to deliver supplies, food, water, blankets, diapers to the people of Japan when they needed it. So it was a really great experience for us.
I think I recall the term Tomodachi. I think that means friend, doesn't it? Yeah.
Tomodachi is friend, yes.
Exactly. Yeah, my Japanese still hangs out. Well, we're going to go ahead and leave you for a few minutes, Commander. We'll be back with you in a while. Let's see, it's about 15 seconds away from network news, and we'll be back with Diann at that time. Right now, the temperature is 75, heading for a high today of probably 90. That's what time it is. It's time for the news. And welcome back to Senior Talk. This morning we have, as we mentioned before, we have Diann McDonough. She's the sales director of the Harbor Place, senior living community down there in Port St. Lucie. We all know it as Harbor Place. Anyway, we are very fortunate to be joined this morning by Lieutenant Commander Daniel Tonto Kitts. We'll have to ask him about that nickname in a while, but for the time being, we'll just turn over to Diann, and I'll turn on the commander's mic as well. So we're all back on, folks. Go ahead, Diann.
The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter is a stealth jet plane. Danny, what does stealth mean to you as a jet aviator?
Yeah, so stealth is something that the United States, certainly isn't new to the United States Armed Forces. It's the ability to be able to penetrate enemy defense areas that are protected by early warning and advanced radar, either without detection or delayed detection, and was one of the design features that was chosen to be utilized in this airplane. So
fantastic.
That's what we have now.
It's a threat avoidance and survival. And
correct.
I know the future
increases the survivability of the airplane when it's in enemy airspace.
Lieutenant Commander, what's interesting to me about the F-35C is the lift fan system, the hovering. Can you tell us more about that and how that's run with the fans?
Yeah, so the actual F-35B is the variant that has the lift fan in it. So directly behind the cockpit seat, the pilot seat, is a large lift fan, and it really depends on two sources to lift the airplane in the vertical lift arena. It uses that lift fan that's behind the pilot, and then the nozzle of the engine exhaust actually rotates 90 degrees downward, and those 2 points, the lift fan and the engine exhaust that's now rotated downward, provide the lift for the airplane. There's also some doors on the wing that open and provide some of the roll control. And what has really been brilliant about this airplane is the way that they incorporate all that with the pilot stick and throttle in the cockpit, and the simplicity of the design. It's really intuitive for how you would imagine how you would control the airplane in the hover mode. So they've really done a brilliant job with doing that, and it really makes the task a lot simpler than it's been historically, with really our only other operational platform that's done that, which has been the Aviate-B Harrier, which was a lot more complicated, complex. And while the environment is still dangerous doing vertical lift in a jet airplane, it's made the task a lot easier, and it removes a lot of the potential for pilot error with the control laws that they've built for that particular mode. It's really brilliant.
If the Harrier was similar to the lift fan system, why didn't we continue on with the Harrier? What is the cons of the Harrier?
Well, I don't know if there's any cons to the Harrier, and I get a lot of questions that try to compare the F-35 to other airplanes. And what we try to always remember is that the F-35 is only going to be part of the carrier air wing of the future. We're still going to have F-18s, and the F-18s and our legacy platforms still have a lot of utility and a lot of use left in them. They are good airplanes, and they have a lot of good aspects to them. There are some things that you have to have built into the airplane from scratch. And when we talk a fifth generation or a next generation fighter, and we talk about the ability to fuse all the mission systems data, the low observable characteristics, all those things have to be designed into the aircraft from scratch from when you're building it. So if you didn't design those things in to begin with, they will really never be there. So I don't say anything bad about the Harrier. The Harrier is still in use, and it will be in use for some time. And it brings a lot of things, a lot of capabilities to our armed forces. The F-35 is also going to bring a lot of capabilities and some things that our other airplanes can't do. So, when we bring all these tools together, it'll form our amphibious ready groups and our carrier air wings as we move forward.
It's my understanding the Harrier have flown many missions over Afghanistan, but the only thing is it's not supersonic. Am I correct?
You are correct. The Harrier is not a supersonic platform.
And that's what we're trying to do with the F-35s.
F-35 is a supersonic platform, yeah. So it's really one of the only airplanes ever that's been able to do that short takeoff, vertical land, and fly supersonically in between.
Well, if anyone hasn't seen any of these YouTube videos of the F-35, I recommend you go on there. It's just amazing, the lift fan system. And you're right, Lieutenant Commander, that it is absolutely brilliant how that is run, how the 90-degree turn on that fan helps with the lift. So hopefully you can get on and take a look at those YouTubes as well. And Danny, do you have any other features that you'd like to discuss about the F-35?
Well, I don't know. For me, it's been just a tremendous honor to be part of this program and to have impact on the developmental phase of the airplane. And, a lot of the things that hopefully we've found and tests have been corrected, will continue to be corrected, and will just become inherent to the airplane as we move forward. The Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, our foreign partners, they intend to use this aircraft for a very long time. And so for me, it's really cool to think, I have a son, he's 9 years old, will be 10 not too long from now, that if he gets into this business, that this will be the airplane that he flies. And to know that I had some part in the development of it, and to ensure that we've we are getting a quality product, a safe product for the future aviators to fly, and a lethal product for our taxpayers in our country. It's been a really cool experience, and it's been a great honor for me to be a part of it.
Commander, let's say we have an 18-year-old boy or girl, lady right now listening to the program, and they say, I'd like to be a Air Force or a naval jet pilot, for example. How many years is it going to take for me to go from 19 to flying a jet in the military?
Yeah, so what's required, and I can speak really more to the Navy than I can to the Air Force, but a college degree is required. For me personally, as I got into a technical area of being a test pilot, a technical degree was required. So I'm an aerospace engineering bachelor's degree in my background. So 4 years or 5 years of schooling and getting a bachelor's degree. And then after that, completing some sort of commissioning program. So I was commissioned out of the Naval Academy, but there are a lot of my peers who are commissioned through Officer Candidate School or through ROTC programs at different universities. And then once I completed that, I went through about really 2 years of flight training before I got my wings, and then I was flying an F-18. So I was in the cockpit of an F-18 when I was about 24 years old. So it doesn't take too long to get from fresh out of high school to sitting in the cockpit of our nation's fighters.
Danny, where's your passion come from to be a naval aviator?
I don't know. My father owned an airplane, a single-engine Piper Cherokee, when I was growing up, and that was certainly my first exposure to really flying, and I loved it, and I loved going flying with my father. Simultaneously with that, when I was in 4th grade, we went on a field trip to the Naval Academy. I grew up in Maryland, and I just kind of thought from that day that that's what I wanted to do. And so it really, for me, was pretty fortunate that I knew pretty early on something that I loved to do. I love to fly, and I knew I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and those two things certainly go hand in hand with each other. And so it kind of all laid out for me. I worked hard to get a commission to the United States Naval Academy and the appointment, and it worked out in the end. And so I don't know where it comes from. I guess just a long time of being involved in aviation and being really interested in it, and a lot of people along the way who have supported that interest and supported me going through it.
It's going to be amazing, Danny. In 20, 30 years, I'm going to hear these stories that you've had. I know at my community at Harbor Place, it's assisted living and independent living, and those were World War II and other various wars, have told me so many stories about being an aviator. And it's amazing how the innovation of the aircraft has taken place. And I know that there's been controversy in reference to the production of the plane on the timing basis and also on cost. But innovation, is my thoughts, is never easy, and it takes time, and it doesn't matter if it's just a jet fighter. Innovation does take time.
Yeah, and like I said before, when you look at the specific engineering challenge of what was undertaken here with this airplane, it's really hard. And we spoke earlier about, when we got involved in the conflict in Afghanistan, we actually got involved in that before the release of the very first iPod. And just to think back on how much technology has changed, where now, smartphones that have way more capability than computers that we used 15 years ago, everyone carries around in their pocket. And while you're developing an airplane, that's kind of got to go through the same growth period of hardware that supports more advanced software and software that supports more advanced requirements. So that's kind of what the airplane has had to go through all along. It certainly has not been without flaw. And, a lot of people ask me what I think about that. Well, that's what I do as a test pilot. We're here to find issues because we know when we build something, we aren't going to get it always 100% right the first time. And if we did, well, then we wouldn't really have a job as a test pilot to find flaws and things to fix with the airplane. So no airplane ever that we have built has been perfect. It's usually not perfect when it gets out to our fleet users, but we try along the way to make it an iterative process where we're finding things with the airplane. We go through a process to fix them, and all that takes time, and of course time and money. So the airplane has not been immune to that. Certainly no airplane that we've built ever has been, but I think it's getting close now. The Air Force has reached their initial operational capability. The Marine Corps has reached their initial operational capability with the airplane, and the Navy's really just around the corner. So the airplane's close to being completely fielded out with its different services and being used for the intent of what it was built and engineered for.
Lieutenant Commander, I have to say that I know that the F-35 is approximately, for the Navy, it's approximately, for the F-35C, is approximately $116 to $118 million a plane. And I'm just, as a pilot, how do you feel knowing that number is attached to that plane?
Yeah, I can't say it's something that I would really think about that much. We train constantly to make sure that we're a safe and effective aviators. So just even for when we're doing our test work, basically before I do any test mission, we'll go to our simulator and do a 1 to 2 hour mission rehearsal sim event where we practice everything that we're going to say and do in the airplane to ensure that we're employing the airplane efficiently and we're doing it safely. So it's something that every naval aviator thinks about all the time: flying safely, making sure that we're following standard procedures, making sure that we're operating with our bodies in the right condition, both physically and with enough rest and hydration and nutrition. So I think we think about that more than actually ever the onerous responsibility of operating an airplane that expensive. I think we just always aim to operate the airplane safely, and that sort of falls out the actual dollar cost of what we're flying.
Lieutenant Commander, take us back. We know that there was an F-15, F-16, F-18. What happened to the F-17?
So, and this is sort of anecdotal from what I know about all of it, but the United States Air Force had a lightweight fighter competition similar to what the F-35 went through, where they had two companies design airplanes and build the prototypes and fly off against each other. So there was two airplanes. One, which the Air Force eventually chose, was the F-16. The loser of that competition was the YF-17. And the YF-17 was later derived a little bit and became the F-18. So if you Google a picture of a YF-17, it looks like a little bit smaller F-18. And that ultimately became the Navy's fourth generation fighter that we ended up building for the United States Navy. The F-18 has been in use by the Navy for quite a long time now, for over 30 years. We have what we call our legacy F-18s, which was our A, B, C, and D variant. And then in the mid to late 90s, we built a new, what we call Super Hornet, and that's our EF version. And now we have also an electronic attack variant, which is the EA-18G. So it's an airframe that, at one point was the loser for the Air Force lightweight fighter competition, but it's gone on to serve the Navy for quite a long time and very prolifically.
What happens to the F-15s, F-16s, and our older planes?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, the F-35 is not replacing really any airplanes. It's just looking to complement our air wings. So we're still going to have F-18s in our carrier air wings for a long time to come. As our airplanes do get older and reach the end of their service life, most of them go into dry storage down in Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where they are kept so that they can be maintained and utilized again if the need ever arises. So Davis-Monthan Air Force Base is a huge sprawling complex that is just filled with old airplanes. We refer to it as the boneyard, and that is where a lot of airplanes, as they reach the end of their service life, they'll end up down there in storage.
Plus the F-18 is also used by the Blue Angels, correct?
Correct, yeah. The Blue Angels do fly F-18. They fly legacy F-18s, and here, before too much longer, they will transition to flying Super Hornet F-18s as well.
Danny, my father, your father-in-law, was in the Navy, and he's always on an aircraft carrier. And I just want to, can you paint us a picture of what it's like being a pilot, flying in on the F-18, taking off and landing, and now going off and taking off on the F-35 and landing on the F-35. Kind of describe and paint that picture for us, because I need our listeners to really appreciate the skill that you have.
So we spend a lot of time, basically from the first moments that we start flying jet and training down in Kingsville, working on the landing pattern. And it's really a focus of what we do. And on all of our fields, we have a replica landing system that we call the lens, the FLAWS lens, or the iFLAWS lens, which is the Fresnel landing optical system. And we practice it all the time. Every time we come back and land, we practice on our placement of that meatball that's on that lens. So that when we do in T-45 training, we'll go out and do a day carrier qualification. And then when we complete our F-18 training, we do a day and night carrier qualification training. And I will say the first time you do it is sort of a terrifying and thrilling experience all at the same time. When you're holding overhead the carrier, it's a gigantic ship, but when you're overhead it a couple thousand feet looking down, it looks very, very small. And as you get more and more experience doing it, it becomes almost an enjoyable task, especially during the day. Maybe never at night, but during the day it becomes a little bit more enjoyable flying on and off the ship. Now, what we've done in the F-35, or not we, but our engineers have really changed the control laws to make landing on the ship a much, much easier task. So there's a couple control laws that have been developed for the airplane, and having experienced it firsthand, it really makes the task of landing on the ship a really, really simple task. And so what's that going to allow our aviators to do in the future? All that time that we spend, even as an experienced aviator, before you go out to the ship, you'll stop everything you're doing to practice your landings, so make sure you're ready to go. And all training in the squadron really stops while you're doing that. So what we'll be able to do in the future is just spend less time working on training for an administrative task, which is taking off and landing, and ensure that we're staying sharp in the tactical arenas that we need to for the airplane.
How much feet is needed to take off?
I would have to look up. So the total length of the carrier is about almost 1,100 feet. A cat track is probably, I would be guessing, but probably about 300-ish feet for the catapult.
A football field, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that you've seen Top Gun. We've all watched that movie many times, I'm sure. Just curious, from a perspective of a trained real pilot, does that movie have any sort of credibility at all?
It has some certainly Hollywood aspects of it, but I think especially some of the particularly video that was shot on the carrier decks. I mean, that's actual footage of Navy operators operating on a carrier deck, and so that's real, and that's what it looks like when we're out there operating. That's actually very accurate to what we do. Now, some of the other stuff for how we conduct training, that was certainly fictionalized, as it has to be. But there are definitely some real aspects to Top Gun.
On the enjoyable side, tell us about call names and call name parties and how you receive a call name. And what is your call name?
So we call them call signs. And when you're in your first, generally your first fleet squadron, which I was in Virginia Beach, we'll have what is called a call sign review board, and it's usually associated with us maybe pulling into port or something like that, where we get together as a squadron and kind of go through the new guys and review some of the things that they've done. Usually we've piled up some things that maybe aren't the brightest things that we've done so far as a new guy in the squadron, and they'll kind of come up with some names that are associated with those things that we've screwed up, and then the squadron will vote on what they think is an appropriate name, and then that's it. Once you got it, and it sticks with you as you follow through. So my call sign is Tonto, and that is maybe a little bit of a longer story on how I got it. But when I was in training to fly an F-18, all of our instructors, I was a lieutenant junior grade at the time, and all of our instructors were lieutenants or lieutenant commanders, and And it was, one, a training role, but it was also a mentorship role. And they kind of gave you a lot of advice on how to get by and how to survive when you get to your squadron. So one of the pieces of advice that they gave us was like, hey, when you show up to your squadron, you need to open your eyes, open your ears, and shut your mouth. And that's what they expected of new guys in the squadron, is to keep your mouth shut and absorb as much as you can. And they said, hey, you should have your mouth shut for about the first 6 months. So I think I maybe took that to a little bit of an extreme where I almost literally did that. And everyone in the squadron started calling me the Silent Indian. And out of that, they derived Tonto. And when I had my call sign review board, that stuck easily.
Fantastic. What is the future? What is next for Lieutenant Commander Kitts?
So I was pretty fortunate to be selected for operational command in the Navy, which is something that isn't afforded to everybody. So I feel very fortunate to be selected to do that. I was then slated to head out to Lemoore to be an executive officer and then follow-on commanding officer of VFA 147, a squadron called the Argonauts. That is slated. I'll probably be leaving for Lemoore about a year from now. And then that squadron is also slated. They currently fly Super Hornets, but they are currently slated to potentially transition. So we'll be heading out back to Lemoore again to join that squadron about a year from now.
Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander Kitts. I just want to say that I'm very proud of you. I know that our listeners are as well. And what's amazing about you, you're a very humbled person. And I always ask, about your planes and so forth. And you always say there could be a little arrogance about a pilot because we watch Top Gun. But it's really nice to see how humbled you are and how you answer it, that by saying, I hope we never really have to use this. If we need to, it's there. But you're very humbled about it. Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know what people generally think about military service, but I think we have more respect for the potential for conflict and the desire to not do it, because certainly not a lot of good things come from when our countries engage in armed conflict with each other. So, we know that we need to steadily increase our capabilities to make sure that our country stays safe. And hopefully, as we do increase those capabilities, it dissuades people from ever wanting to challenge our ideas and our ideals of freedom. So, that's our hope, I think, as armed service members, that, we avoid armed conflict when we can.
Well, Lieutenant Commander Kitts, you have my respect. Thank you for being on the show. God bless you, and God bless America. Paul?
Yeah, Commander Kitts, we certainly want to thank you for joining us today. I'm sure our listeners got a great deal of information out of this. I certainly did. And I was, like I said, I was in the military for many years, and I always looked to the skies because those are the guys that were definitely taking us back home. And something else you have to say, Diann?
Well, Harbor Place is celebrating its 15th anniversary in service, serving our community. We are an independent living community for seniors, assisted living with levels of care, and also we're very proud to have Life Care Centers of America, Life Care, on the same campus, making us a continuum of care with excellent rehab and skilled nursing. You're always welcome to visit us. You can call me at 772-337-4330. We are celebrating our veterans this week with a veterans luncheon. It has all been booked up. There's not any more space left, but keep it in tune. We'll have more in the future. Thank you.
And thank you, Diann. Excellent show today. It's time now for the news from CBS. This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie, Florida.